What's up, guys? This is Ray J back with another video. And in this one, I want to break down what's happening with SPY, Tesla, and the overall markets. I'm going to break down what Jerome Powell said that's very important for the markets moving forward, why tomorrow is going to be a very important day as we're going to be looking for a big reaction to what happens with President Trump's big meeting with Xi Jinping, not to mention the big reaction to big tech earnings. Just know that I am not a financial planner, so take nothing I'm saying as financial advice whatsoever. So I'm not really seeing much news for Tesla specifically. I'm seeing lots of news coming out for the broader markets, and that in turn is what's causing some volatility for Tesla stock. Now, with FOMC, Jerome Powell said some things that were bullish and bearish for the markets. It was very mixed. He did say one thing that caused us to dip initially, but then Tesla got completely bought back up, getting a decent close. And then right now, the market's also dipping because of big tech earnings, at least to some extent, but it's not too bad. The market's still holding up quite nicely, and we have lots of catalysts to be discussing. So let me just put it clearly that, so far, we haven't really lost any major support. Tesla has not broken any structure right now for us to turn to bearish. So we're going to be watching to see if we end up losing support or not heading into tomorrow, or if we're about to see a big bounce. As of right now, the charts do still remain more bullish. They still favor the bulls a bit more. So we're going to see if this ends up panning out or not. But I first want to focus on Jerome Powell, why he's causing so much volatility. As you guys know, Tesla's very sensitive to interest rates, and what he said is going to be crucial for Tesla stock. There's also going to be big news coming out later on, so I'll talk about everything, then I'll break down more details about Tesla stock. First and foremost, we had Jerome Powell who was talking about the big shifts in what the Fed are doing. Okay. The first thing to remember is that the Fed has a dual mandate. They're going to be managing inflation and our unemployment numbers. Now, inflation does have somewhat of an uptrend that has been respected, but it's not too bad because it's aligned with what the Fed is expecting. And simultaneously, the projections still expect inflation to come back down to 2%, which is what the Fed's goal is. However, when it comes to the overall unemployment numbers, there is a delay in data, and Jerome Powell is a little bit uncertain about certain things. And that's part of why the market started to dip because of his uncertainty. Initially, there was over a 90% chance we were going to get a 25 basis point cut by the Fed. But then Jerome Powell said that he cannot promise a 25 basis point cut or any kind of cut in December. Although it's very likely it's going to happen, still it's not as likely as before because Jerome Powell said we have to wait and see what happens with the data. And the Fed has to be very, very cautious, especially for employment. So just to be very, very safe, the market now saw a bit of a sell-off because of that. Now there's only a 67% chance we get a cut in December, and we have to wait and see what happens with all the data. So just keep that in mind. That's a very, very important factor. Tesla is very sensitive to interest rates, so this did affect Tesla. That's why the whole market came down temporarily. We saw Tesla drop to 452. SPY and the QQQ also dipped a little bit, but then we bounced. Then Jerome Powell helped us bounce quite a bit. And that's because Jerome Powell is letting us know something that the Fed is going to be transitioning their policy. Now, why on earth are they doing this? Because one of the things that's happening is that we've been in a period of quantitative tightening for quite a while. The Fed has also been very stagnant, and he mentioned that the overall labor market is currently like quite stable. It's not really scaring the Fed, but there are risks to it, which is why the Fed wants to be kind of like cautious, right? What typically happens is the Fed is behind the curve and then they start scrambling to cut rates. In this case, they want to be very careful with the way at which they go about things in case the same thing ends up happening. So with quantitative tightening that was going on for quite a while, the Fed is going to be transitioning their policy by easing up on policy, at least to some extent, starting in December. And one thing they're going to be doing is buying back the Treasury bonds. Now, this is not the same thing as like printing money because it's not going to like stimulate the economy to that extent, but to some extent, it will still stimulate things, and that is their way of kind of like easing up. So the Fed will indirectly stimulate the economy by buying back the Treasury bonds. That is what the Fed is going to be doing very soon. And Jerome Powell made that very clear. This is because of the risks of the economy taking a bit of a hit because of higher interest rates. We're slowly starting to see that unravel, and there are some breaks that are starting to happen. Is it a massive, massive break like 2008? As of right now, the data does not suggest that. But because of the risks, that's why the Fed is now already starting to kind of like ease up on things. So they're not necessarily going full on money printing like crazy right now. It's more like they're going to be stimulating the economy indirectly to some extent, and that is more bullish for the stock market. I hope that's as clear as possible. When asked about specific things involving AI, our data and such, Jerome Powell did once again cite that the government shutdown is still going on, so we're still waiting for a lot of factors to pan out. So we're still waiting to see how that's going to go, and they still have to wait on data. So some of the things he said were more bullish, some things were more bearish. But overall, I would say that for the more medium term, it still is more bullish because yes, we start off with the small dip with the news that in December we might not be getting a cut, or it's not as confident, right? We're not as confident about that. We have to wait and see what happens with the data, of course. But then the market got completely bought back up as Jerome Powell remained more stern and more fixated on the notion that things are still stable and that things are going to be all right as the Fed is transitioning into this new phase. That is why SPY dipped, then bounced, and managed to close in the green. That's why the QQQ dipped, then bounced, and closed in the green. That's why Tesla dipped and then bounced. Okay, so initially, Jerome Powell actually helped the market dip and bounce. But the market then started to sell off again. Why is the market selling off in the after hours? We have the second big catalyst. The first one was Jerome Powell. He caused a dump and a pump. The second catalyst is this big tech earnings. All right, we have Meta, Microsoft, and Alphabet slash Google, which just announced their earnings. However, tomorrow we also have Amazon and Apple, the two big ones. Get ready for those for tomorrow. What's happening with the earnings? First and foremost, due to them being charged a lot of tax, Meta has seen their EPS drop quite a bit. We saw their revenue at $51.24 billion, beating expectations, but their EPS was at $6.03, below the estimates of $6.72. The share price is also down over 9% in the after hours, unfortunately, despite the earnings call. So Meta is down quite a bit. Microsoft had decent earnings. I think they had good growth overall. They also beat expectations for the fiscal quarter. They saw their net income or their operating income up 24%. And then their fiscal year is looking quite strong for them. So they're doing quite well overall. We also saw a big improvement in their cloud business, but this wasn't really enough to get the share price moving. I think that much of the news was good, but much of this was already priced in, so it wasn't really enough to wow investors. And despite that, Alphabet, this one is basically up 6% because they beat on EPS and revenue. They also raised their guidance, and their revenue is up 16%. Good job by Alphabet slash Google, beating expectations, and their overall AI growth has strong momentum, and they're doing very well. So that's like a summary of everything, at least so far. That's why, and let me just clarify that right now, at the time I'm recording this, Meta is down 7%. It's trying to bounce a little bit, but still down 7%. Google's up 6%, and then Microsoft is down 3%. So 2 out of 3 big tech earnings ended up seeing red results for the share prices. Two out of three are red, and 1 out of 3 are in the green, and that's why the market has a more like red effect in the after hours. Tesla's down 0.6% in the after hours. SPY and the QQQ are both down 0.2%. But that's not that bad, guys. That's not that bad. We're only down just a little bit, which kind of like solidifies the notion that this market is still resilient. It's still holding up decently, at least so far. But there's one more big, massive catalyst that's coming. I was talking about this in my penultimate video. There's one more big catalyst, and that is President Trump going to South Korea to meet up with Xi Jinping and many other leaders. This is going to be a massive catalyst, and this could be the make or break catalyst for the markets. Let's break down the details. The first thing I want to mention is that President Trump has been negotiating lots of trade deals with different countries from Malaysia and many more. And now we have a new trade deal with South Korea. President Trump said that we pretty much have the deal. He said we reached a deal. We did a lot of different things. It was a great session. Then he said that we came to a conclusion on a lot of very different items. So there's a big trade deal with South Korea that President Trump has announced. That is something that's worth noting because we're seeing lots of deals, and China could be next. China could be the next big deal that's coming out, and this will have a big effect on the stock market. So here are the details. Okay, today at 11 o'clock a.m. in South Korea, which is going to be essentially 10 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time, or about 4 or 5 hours from now, there's going to be some very, very big news coming out. President Trump will be meeting up with Xi Jinping, the president of China. This is massive, massive, massive news. Okay. This is going to be huge because they're going to be debating a lot of different things. The first thing to look for it would be President Trump's tariff threats on China, which were supposed to begin on November 1st, which is just a couple of days from now. However, the tariffs may be delayed because of negotiations. They're also going to be negotiating the rare earth materials to talk about what's going to happen with those. So keep that in mind. That's going to be another big factor. Then there's going to be a lot of talk about soybean sales, what's happening with Russia and a lot of different things. But the main thing is going to be the overall negotiations involving the rare earth export controls and the overall tariffs. Simultaneously, President Trump also said that he may be discussing Nvidia's Blackwell AI chips with President Xi Jinping. And they're going to do this in response to the ban on Nvidia's chips, leaving the company with no market share there. So that's a very, very important piece of news. So I think this is going to be huge. If things go as planned, I want to remind everyone for the last few weeks, President Trump, his team, his officials have been saying we're going to have a great deal with China. There's been so much negotiating that's been going on. They've been talking about how there's going to be a fantastic deal for both sides. They've been saying this for a while. It's been a long while since we've been hearing this. And as we've been hearing them saying this, we're going to see if this truly ends up happening tomorrow. What are the details of this deal? Also, this could be massive for Nvidia and many semiconductors because they depend on the materials, and simultaneously they also depend on restrictions. And he's going to be negotiating restrictions for Nvidia's AI chips. So this could be very, very big. So if we get a good deal, if the market likes what it's hearing, if Nvidia benefits from this and the US gets a very, very big positive deal, I would not rule out the possibility of us gapping up and just starting to pump more. That's a possibility. But if we if we don't really get a great deal, if it's just kind of like the exact same things we expect and the market's not wowed by this, and if Tesla ends up losing support at 452, I would not rule out the possibility of us dipping back down to like 444 or below for a temporary pullback. That's also very possible. Those are going to be the two main possibilities, but let's talk about what's more likely. So I want to note that Tesla has been on an uptrend, higher highs, higher lows, higher highs, higher lows, over and over and over again. President Trump did say that there's going to be a fantastic deal with China coming and that his tariffs could be delayed, which could be positive for the markets. And this could help the market bounce if we get some good news, right? And if the overall market bounces, that could really benefit us. Now, I also want to note that when you look at Tesla's setup, it looks more bullish. We have this inverse head and shoulders right here, right? A left shoulder right here ahead, and then this double bottom forming the right shoulder, which would once again drag us even higher for a nice pump. Inverse head and shoulders taking us back up towards, the 470s all over again. The setup does look more bullish on Tesla if we could hold key support, and we got a decent close. So overall, we're doing well. Also, the daily time frame actually looks more bullish on Tesla. Looks a bit more bullish. So technicals do favor upside. We're looking more bullish on Tesla. We favor that we want to go higher. We'll see just to be safe if that ends up happening or not. So let's talk about how this is going to go. Then I'll give you guys my prediction. Just in case, we don't see a big wow factor if we don't get the big bounce after President Trump's negotiations with China, if there's no deal. And if we lose 452, then we could continue to fall. There is this gap down here also. So 452, 444, and then the gap will back down to 433 are going to be our bearish targets. The bullish target is going to be that, wait a second, we get a really good deal. Nvidia benefits from this, just like President Trump was telling us. President Trump delays his tariffs. The export controls on the very, very rare earth materials are delayed, right? That's going to be huge, right? And that could actually cause Tesla to gap up and try to run back up into the 470s just like that. I think that from what President Trump was saying, he's been saying there's going to be a big deal. It's going to be fantastic. And I think that, he's been giving us lots of deals for the last couple of days. There's a good chance they get the deal done. And we might be looking for a big bounce in Tesla and the markets, especially as we're holding up quite nicely. This drop we got from FOMC could have just been a trap for bears. I would not be surprised if we actually get a bounce like this, but we'll see just to be safe. I think it's a bit more probable we get a gap up and a go for Tesla. We just start to bounce, but we'll see just to be safe. So keep that in mind. For SPY, okay, the same thing essentially, right? If we lose 682, we could dump to fill this gap back down to 677. If we hold support there, we could be looking for another push and another leg up higher. Why do I say that? Firstly, we did bounce near our golden pocket before, and we also tested our 0.382 fib level. And that's where we're kind of like testing on SPY. We're also making higher lows so far, and we have a tendency of kind of like bouncing. We start to dip a bit, then we bounce. We start to dip a little bit, then we bounce. So are we about to see a massive bounce? We're going to have to see about that. If we don't get the wow factor tomorrow from President Trump's deal, and if we lose 682, look for that gap fill back down here. And if we end up bouncing, if we hold above 688, we could continue to break to all-time highs into the 690s. I wouldn't be surprised if we just gap up and go. Maybe President Trump gives us a good deal. I think the odds favor that, but we'll see just to be safe. Always be open minded. But I do lean a little bit more in favor of this. We kind of like gap up and just start running for the 690s. Maybe this dip was a trap. I could be wrong though, but that's what I'm thinking right now. That's where I lean towards in my honest opinion. We'll see just to be safe. On the QQQ, if we lose 630, we're looking for 625. If that fails us, there's a big gap to fill at 617. But keep in mind, we might get a big deal tomorrow morning. If it comes, we could gap up and start pushing for 644. We'll see if that ends up being the case. For the IWM, if there's no major deal, we could be dumping from here. We need to reclaim 248. If we hold above 248, we're looking for a bounce. We're completely range bound right now, so it could go either way. ES is barely holding 6,900. We need to hold the 6,900 area. If we don't hold that, there's going to be a risk of us dipping to fill this gap towards 6,840. If we hold 6,900, though, we could be looking for a big bounce for new highs. If we get a big deal with China, we're testing our 20 EMA. We're at support. We need to bounce right here or else we dump. NQ is dipping right now. We need to hold 26,000. If we hold this, we're looking for a big bounce. If not, we could dump back down towards 25,700 next. Hopefully, we get the big bounce. Bitcoin's on a bit of a downtrend. We need to essentially bounce right here around 110,000. If so, we could be looking for a retest of 112,000. If not, we dump even lower. Tesla's not doing too bad. It's only at 458 right now. It's not too bad. Small dip down 0.6%. I have hope that we might bounce if we get a good deal. We'll see just to be safe. So be unbiased and play the trend. But if we get that deal that President Trump is telling us about, and if the market likes it, we could be looking for a big bounce. If not, be ready for the rug pull. Hopefully we bounce still. We'll see just to be safe. Nvidia, if we get a big deal involving Nvidia, President Trump did say he's going to be trying to negotiate for Nvidia's Blackwell chips. If we lose 202, we could be dumping more, but as long as we hold above this support, we're looking for an attempt for 212 and basically new highs on Nvidia for a breakout. It could be bouncing, so we'll see. Apple looks more bullish. As long as we don't lose 266, we're going to be favoring 272 to 275 for more upside potential. Let me go over a couple more and just be kind of quick with this. Netflix is trying to base right here. As long as we don't lose 1,080, we're favoring a bounce for 1111 for a temporary bounce if we hold support. There's a slight divergence on MSTR. As long as we don't lose 275, we could be looking for a bounce for like the 280s. Celsius is on a bit of a downtrend right here. We're going to see if we could hold 60 or not. If we lose this, we could be dumping more. If we hold this, we could be bouncing to 62. Supermicro, we have 52 as our main support. If that fails us, we could be dumping more back down towards 50. But if we hold this, we could try to bounce. As you could tell, we're making lower highs here, so we'll have to see how it goes. There is a risk of some downside, technically speaking, but it also depends on the big deal. If there's some kind of like chip deal, there is an inverse head and shoulder setup that favors like a bit of a dip and a bounce like this. We'll see, though, depending on President Trump's negotiations. When it comes to other factors, such as Palantir, we look more bullish. As long as we don't end up losing 195, we're still favoring 200 plus. For other tickers like Rivian, we need to see if 13.5 to 13.4 holds. We might dip towards that area before it tries to bounce. SoFi might retest 30 to 29, that range down here, and we'll see if we bounce. There is still some downside risk, though. AMD's on an uptrend. As long as we don't lose 254, we're going to favor consolidation and a push back up for 265. ARM has support at 169. We're going to see if this holds. If not, we could be dipping more towards 167. So be very careful. PayPal is dipping here. We're going to see if we could hold above 68 or not. There is support down there, and we'll see how it goes. Coinbase has support at 347. We're going to see if this holds. If not, we could be dipping to 344. So watch that very carefully. Amazon is consolidating. It depends on earnings tomorrow. It could go either way. It doesn't really matter. Hopefully, we get a big bounce after earnings. It could go either way. Meta is down quite a bit. However, it's starting to bounce a little bit. We're still down 7%. That's better than being down 9%. I want to see us get back above 700 tomorrow. Hopefully, we try to reclaim it. If not, it's not going to be a good sign. Google is holding up nicely. We could be trying to go back up for 300. It looks more bullish. Microsoft is kind of weaker, but I want to see it hold 525 tomorrow. We're going to see if that holds. Oracle's looking kind of weaker, could be dipping back down towards 270, and we'll see if it bounces there. DJT is a little bit more bearish, looking for the lower 15s. The VIX is trying to bounce near 17.73. We need to break that to be bullish. If not, we could reject. It's a make or break level for the VIX. The 10 years going up because of Jerome Powell once again. He caused the confidence in us getting a cut in December to go down, which is why the yield's going up. The dollar is kind of flat. Cruise is not really doing much. So with that being said, guys, anything could happen depending on what happens with this negotiation deal between President Trump and Xi Jinping. But I do have hope that there's a good chance we get a decent deal, and President Trump might actually help the markets pump. He's done that many times when people least expected it. And if we get a good deal, and if the exports controls on minerals are delayed, and if President Trump announces something very big involving Nvidia's restrictions being lifted, if we get a lot of good things from the deal, from the negotiations that happen starting in a couple of hours, that could be very, very bullish for the stock market if we get the right things, right? That it's never guaranteed, it's a possibility. We'll just have to see what happens with this deal, which is why I gave you guys a warning a couple of hours ago about this. But hopefully we get something good from this, and we'll see how it goes. There is a good chance we try to gap up and start running tomorrow, but we'll see just to be safe. In case we lose critical support, watch the gaps below. I do lean more bullish, though, looking at the current setups. We still look bullish. We have not lost any major support, so there is still more hope for bulls than bears, and we'll see if that holds heading into tomorrow. Thank you all so much for listening. Enjoy the rest of your guys' days, and I'll be back tomorrow before market open for another update. Until then, I wish you all the best. Let's just, go to bed, wake up tomorrow, and see what happens with all these negotiations and such, and we'll see what happens after that. All right, so take care, guys. I'll see you guys tomorrow, and let's just hope for the best, and we'll see what happens. We'll just be patient with this. Hopefully, we see another rally in the markets. We might end up getting another pump in Tesla if things go well, and we'll see how it goes. Thank you for listening, and peace out.